everybody, it's Erin Fisher. Amanda is here as well, and we're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this, and then I will send out an email this afternoon to everyone who attended with any PowerPoints that we have and an additional document as well. Instead of going through the pain of trying to do roll call over the phone, which I'm sure you all are well accustomed to, we're going to make it a little bit easier, and please just, if you are attending this phone call, send Amanda an email and let her know that you're here. You should be able to see her email address on the screen, but just for you to know, it's noc12@nwccog.org. So it's recording. Please send in your roll call so we know who to send the information to after this is over. Today we're going to start off with Simon with Chocolate Software. He and Devon are the owners of Chocolate Software. They're the ones, when you go in to do your monthly reimbursements each month, that's their system that we're using, and we're using their system for the RFP. So Simon's going to go over how the RFP works. You can ask him whatever questions you may have, and then I'll go over some AAA contracting stuff, and you can ask all the questions you may have then as well. So for those people who may have just joined in the last minute or so, we're just telling you that please send an email to Amanda at noc12@nwccog.org to let you know that to let her know that you're on this call. That's how we're going to do roll call instead of doing it verbally. Any questions before we turn it over to Simon? Great. Simon, I will give it over to you.
Good stuff. Good morning, everyone. While I get this set up. All right, so hopefully you can all see my screen now. So as Erin said, my name is Simon. Devon and I have been working with Alpine AAA for many years now, not only in the reimbursement system, but on the RFP system, which some of you I know have used in years past. And so today is a refresher for those of you that have used the system in the past. There are a couple of key changes that I'll highlight when we get to it that hopefully make the experience easier for you. And for those of you that haven't used the system, this is an overview. It's going to be a fairly quick overview of how the system works. I've tried to put together a deck of slides that is almost like a cookbook. So when Erin sends these out to you, you'll have these slides as reference for later on down the road. So let's jump in and get started then. The key process here is really only 4 steps long, and of those 4 steps, it's really the first one and the last one that are at all involved. The rest of it is fairly straightforward. So I'm going to spend most of my time today on this first and last steps in the process. But the basic process is you have to register and log into the system. You then create a blank proposal and basically fill in all the details that are required for a complete proposal. Step 3 is to go through and validate it, and that's really just checking for errors to making sure that all of the required information that Erin has asked for is complete and valid. And then the final step is just to go ahead and submit it. And the submission process is entirely electronic, so it streamlines the process of getting these things submitted on time. So I'm just going to step through these various steps one at a time, and we'll talk about the specifics of each. The registration process is somewhat involved, mainly because it requires coordination at the agency level. So if you work in an agency where there's more than one person going to be preparing the proposal, you need to coordinate with your coworkers in order to identify the person that is going to be actually logging in first to create this profile. Just backing up a step, there are a couple of things to point out before we even get to that point. First of all, the URL for the RFP system, I believe Erin has sent that all out to you, so you all know what that is, but it's on that page there. The other thing is, for those of you that have logged into the RFP system in years past, you do have to create a new user account every RFP. So you will have to go through and re-register both your agency and yourself for the SFY19 RFP. The other bullet point there, the last bullet point, is kind of redundant in this case, but it's not inconceivable that there will be multiple RFPs open at once, and you need to make sure you select the right one from the drop-down. So the process of actually registering requires that you go through, like I said, to identify that person in your organization that's going to be the very first person to log in. And their job is to set up what we call the agency profile. So every person that has a login account has to be associated with an agency. And that requires that one person go into the system first and create that agency profile and the agency password. And then they are going to share that password with their coworkers so that those people can then associate themselves with their specific agency. So that first person in, they will go through and they will click on this. If registering for the first time, click here. Once they've done that, you'll all go in then and log in, and you'll click on that same link to create your personal profile. And I'll show you what that means. So once you click that link, you end up on this page that says create profile for the SFY 18/19 RFP. And you can see that the form is blank. It gives you a sense of the information it needs to capture. If your agency is not in that first drop-down list, then you need to go to this link over on the far right that says agency not listed, and this is where you create the agency profile. Clicking on that link brings up a similar looking page, although it's asking for specific information about your agency. So name, address, phone number, fax number, etc. Down the bottom here is where you create your agency password. Now, this is a password that you're going to share with your coworkers so they can create their personal login. So my recommendation is don't use a password that you use for your personal email account. Don't use anything that you would be embarrassed sharing with your coworkers. Be fairly generic in that password because you are going to share it with each of them. Once that first person has gone through and filled out this form and created that agency password, the system then pushes them back a page to the personal profile page. So the same form we looked at just a second ago, but you can see that the agency dropdown has now got an organization selected, and it's pre-populated some of the address fields. This is where you then enter your personal information. So it's registering you personally. And the key pieces of information you need here, obviously your name, an email address, and then a personal password for yourself. You have the ability to populate the address. So in this particular case, this Chocolate Home Healthcare has a registered office address on Wolf Street in Denver. If you personally work at a different office, you can put in your office address. So you don't have to accept the agency address as the default. Down the bottom here, the very last thing you enter is that agency password that you've got from that coworker of yours that was the first person in and created that password. And so you have to know that password before you can create a personal login profile. Once you've created that profile, the system then takes you to what we call the required reading section of the RFP. And this is all of the boilerplate material that you need to have reviewed prior to submitting an RFP. And the way this works is it steps you through the different sections that you're required to look at. You just simply go up and click the first link in the list, and as you step through the pages, it will actually put a check mark in each one of these little check boxes as you go through. And ultimately, you go through all 12 sections here, and you end up down the bottom here with this checkbox becoming active. It's inactive at the moment because I haven't actually gone through any of these sections. And this agree button will become live, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now I've gone through and I've reviewed every section of that required reading. I can now check this checkbox, hit the agree button, and at that point, I've actually gone through the full registration process. And it puts me into a home page that's not dissimilar to what you're used to looking at when you go and do your monthly reimbursement requests. So same basic setup, log in, log out button at the top of the page here, and a menu down the left side. So at this point then, we've gone through and successfully registered. We're now able to start creating the proposal. To do that, you just click on the link, the only link on the left side that says Create New Proposal. And what this does is it creates a blank proposal, and your job at that point is to fill it in. When you click on that Create New Proposal link, it puts you into another page that will just walk you through the various sections that you need to complete in order to put together a full proposal. And the menu options on the left there basically guide you through the pieces of information you need to collect. My advice to you all is to work through them one at a time, but you don't have to. And in a situation where you might have multiple people in the agency putting in information, you may not need to. So there may be some person that's responsible for doing just the fiscal piece of it, doing the budgets. And there may be another person that's responsible for doing the units and clients, for example. They can come in and click on that relevant link, go to that. Other people may be doing the narrative questions. They can just go in and do that. So it gives you the ability to work through it sequentially or to do it however it makes sense for the people that are doing. The page that I'm now on, obviously, is this general information page, the very first link in the list there. The only piece of information that you're required to provide there is to give your proposal some relevant name. The other thing I'll point out here is you can see next to that save button, it says to save often. The system will time you out after 20 minutes. So if you're in the system working on it and the telephone rings, I would recommend hitting the save button wherever you have the option to, just to make sure that it saves it, so that if you do get kicked out, logged out of the system, when you come back in, that information's all saved. So stepping through then, the second piece of information is the agency background page. It's fairly standard stuff, nothing particularly onerous in terms of what you need to put in there. The third page is the contacts page, and there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, the information in this contacts page is important when you get to the submission piece, because it's going to pull information from your contact list in order to verify that you want to submit, and I'll explain what that means later on in the process. The key pieces of information that you have to put in there are the three roles, names and addresses for the three roles that you see in that list: the agency director, the proposal contact, and the program manager. By default, the person that clicked on that Create New button, Create New Proposal, is automatically tagged as the proposal contact. You can change it, but they automatically get tagged as that. So in this particular case, then we have to add two other roles to this. We have to add an agency director and a program manager. Now, one person can have more than one role. So in the next slide, you can see that I actually assign myself the role of program manager, and I added a second person a dog in this case, but a second person, as the agency director. And so now I've successfully completed, identified all the roles that are required by the system. The services tab is where things get really busy, because this is where the bulk of the information for the proposal gets entered. And the process here is quite straightforward. You just go in and you select a service from this drop-down, and you click the Add Now button, and it will add a blank service to your proposal. You can add multiple services to one proposal. So in this particular case, I've just added a chore service, but you can have however many services you think you can provide adequately, or you're prepared to provide into this particular proposal. Once you've got the services in the list, it's then a process of going through and filling in the 3 required pieces of information here: the budget, the units and clients, and the volunteer info. I'm going to, well, you can also see that down the bottom here, the non-compensated services, there's only one required, the outreach efforts. And this is just an aggregate number of units for the entire proposal. So you don't have to break this out at the individual service level. It's just aggregate for all the services that you're going to provide. So I am now going to step through the budget piece. This is the piece that has changed significantly since the last time we did the RFP, and it's all based on feedback that we've got from users over the years. So hopefully what we've done here is made the system a lot simpler for everybody. Just the way this now works is it's set up like a wizard. So it basically steps you through the pieces of information that you need to provide in order to put together a complete budget. And you can see up here in the top right of this box, it actually tells you how many pages there are in this wizard. So you need to step through 5 separate pages, and they are collecting the various pieces of budget information that you need to provide. You can see also on the far right side, we have this thing called the budget tracker, and it's giving you a summary of the revenues and expenses in your budget. And it's also giving you feedback in terms of whether that budget balances. And if you remember back to the old system, one of the key business rules is you have to provide a budget that balances. Revenues and expenses have to equal. In the old version of this, there was no feedback on whether they were in balance until you got to the very end of the process when you validated. So this is giving you instantaneous feedback all the way through the process. So on this first screen, you enter the amount of state and federal funding that you're requesting for this proposal. I'm going to enter $10,000, and then I clicked on the next button and went to screen number 2, which is asking you about local matching funds. This is your in-kind match and your local cash. This screen is also, excuse me, providing us some feedback. You can see, first of all, the budget tracker. This is now telling us that revenues and expenses are not matching because I've put in $10,000. I haven't got any expenses at the moment, so it puts up this big red banner to show you that your budget is out of whack. If I zoom in on this page a little bit, you can see that it's also providing feedback in terms of the amount of match that you're required to present. So I've requested $10,000. The system has gone away and calculated that I need to provide $1,111.11 in match using the formula put up under the Older Americans Act. In this particular case now, you can see that I've entered 2 kinds of local match. I've entered my local cash of $1,000. The source of funds lists some different categories of funding that you can select to say where the money is coming from. So it requires you to provide a little bit more detail in terms of where this local money is coming from. And you also have this details option here to provide even more detail. So my $1,000 in local cash came from local government entity, and you can see that I said it was a grant from the county in this case. You can put in as many of these as you need to. You can see that this line up here, it's actually giving me feedback. It went from, in the previous screen, you can see that I haven't got any match provided as yet, and so it's highlighted in red. Once I've successfully met the minimum match, it changes to green, so it gives you a bit of feedback that you've actually met the match that you need to meet. So at that point, I've entered all that local matching funds. I can click the next button down in the lower right corner there, and I move on to screen number 3, which is now called Other Sources of Revenue, and this is where you enter things like your client contributions and program income and those sorts of things. Same sort of deal. There's a list of other revenue sources. You type in the amount. You can add details if you want to, just to give us a bit more information in terms of where those funds are coming from. So at that point then, I've entered all of my revenue information, and you can see once I move over to the next screen, screen 4, I'm now at the point of entering expenses. It starts out by entering personnel expenses. This is another significant change up from the years past, in the sense that it now allows you to enter personnel information in 2 different forms. You can enter whether they are a salaried or an hourly employee. And if you remember the old system, it just let you enter direct service or administrative personnel. Now you can break out whether they're salaried or an hourly rate. So the chore workers that I've entered for this, I put them in as an hourly rate of $20 an hour for total number of hours of 400, and it's calculated a cost. In this particular case, I'm entering an administrative person as a salaried employee. That person is the scheduler, and so all I need to do is enter their annual salary and the percent of time that they're going to dedicate to this program. And I click the green Add Personnel button, and it then adds them. And you can see that I put them in at $42,000 a year, 3.5% of their time on this program, for a total of $1,470. And so it lets you build up the personnel list that way. You can do it as an hourly rate, or you can do it as a percent of time employee. So clicking on the next button then will take me to screen 5, the last screen, where you get to build up your program expenses, the actual budget items. In the old system, there was just a long category, some of which weren't relevant to you. This one lets you build them up individually, so you only have to enter expense line items for the actual expenses that you're going to incur. This screen is last because this is probably the one where you're going to work the hardest to get your budget to balance, or use to get your budget to balance. So if I just zoom in on my budget tracker, for example, you can see that I'm currently at $11,325 in terms of grant revenues. I need to get my grant expenses to match that. And so basically what I want to do here is add $1,855 to my program expenses in order to get those 2 columns to match, 2 numbers to match. And so that's what I've done, right? I've added 3 budget categories by selecting the expense type, travel, putting in the amount, $810, and then putting in some description, projected 1,500 miles at 54 cents a mile. And just click add expense item, and it will go through and incrementally add all those items and give you a running total. And you can see at this point then, I've now got my budget to match. And so that's giving you instantaneous feedback about the status of your budget, and hopefully that will make life easier for you all. At that point then, you've entered the budget for this, and you can click the home button over in the lower left side there, and it will take you back to the page where you were adding those services. So I've now got my chore budget entered. I can now move on to the next line there, the next item, which is the units and clients. This process is pretty much the same as in years past. The only difference here is we've greatly simplified the number of service areas. In fact, we've just collapsed that back to counties. So you'll select a service area county rather than a community or some sort of sub-geography. And so you select the service area from the drop-down. It automatically pops up this screen then that asks you for the units of service in that particular county. So I'm saying I'm going to do 200 units in Grand County. At that point, you can also enter more information about your specific service area. So you can see I'm focusing on 3 communities in Grand County rather than the county as a whole. And then finally, down the bottom, there is the information about the specific clients and the targeted clients that you propose to do in your proposal. Click the Save button. It will take you back to this screen. At that point, then, you need to enter the volunteer information, and there's only 2 pieces of information there. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that one, and you can figure that out. There's only 2 bits of information, so it's very straightforward. From there, then, the next item is to answer the narrative questions, and I suspect this is where most of you will spend most of your time. There are 15 questions in here. Some of them will require, you spend some time and energy putting them together. The key thing I want to point out here is you can see that some of these have a red star next to them. This indicates that it's a required question. You have to provide an answer to this question, otherwise the proposal won't validate. So make sure that you go through and answer all the right questions. I'm going to skip the uploaded associated documents. Erin is not requiring you to attach any documents to this proposal, so there's nothing for you to do then. So at that point then, we've filled out the proposal, excuse me, and we can proceed to validate it to make sure that it's error-free before we submit it. I've got a frog in my throat. The validation process is quite simple. You just go to the validate link there on the left side, click that, and it runs away in the background and compares your proposal as it currently stands with a whole bunch of business rules that Erin set up to say, this is what I require from a complete proposal. And it will spit out errors to tell you what you need to fix. And you can see in this case, I've got 12 errors, and I've also got 2 warnings. I'll come back to the warnings in a second. The key thing about errors is you cannot submit your proposal until you've resolved all these errors. You can see most of my errors fall into one category. I didn't answer a required question in the narrative section. You can also see that very top error is just pointing out that my budget doesn't balance. I actually went through and finagled the numbers just to make sure that I could show you a different kind of error. At that point in time, you can click on the Fix link on the far right there. It will take you back to the page where the error resides. You can go in there, fix the problem, go back and validate and make sure that it's gone. And you basically just step through each of these errors in turn in order to get to the point where you validate again and it comes up and says, congratulations, you've successfully validated the proposal. You can see at this point then the only thing I have left are those 2 warnings. Warnings are really just flags to say, hey, there's a couple of things I noticed about your proposal that you may want to check. It could be legitimate that you want to submit without answering those 2 questions, and therefore you don't need to worry about it. But I do recommend that you read the list of warnings that you get at the end of the validation process just to make sure you haven't missed anything. Once you're comfortable that you've completed all the information correctly in your proposal, you can then start the process of submission. This is another one of those complex processes in the sense that it requires some feedback between the system and you. And what I mean by that is when you go to submit, it actually requires you to get a system-generated PIN prior to submission. That means, so what happens here is you click that green button, it goes away and it generates a PIN that's unique to you and your proposal. and it sends an email with that PIN to the person that is the designated proposal contact and to the person that's designated as the agency director. So 2 emails get fired off. You need that PIN in order to submit. So at this point in time, once you've hit that green button, you basically have to sit and wait for the email to come in. Once you get that email, you can come back to this page. Well, actually, before I say that, the other thing to note is that those PINs are time sensitive. So they expire after 24 hours. So if you get the email and you sit on it a day, that PIN is no longer valid. You'll have to request another PIN. The reason we fired off to 2 people, to the proposal contact and the agency CEO, is just to make sure that that your bosses all know that somebody from their agency is about to submit a proposal for Alpine's call for proposals. Once you get that email, it's a system-generated email. It comes from oasis.com. You can go back to this page and you can click on this link at the bottom of the page that says click here if you have the PIN. And that basically takes you to the final page in the process. And this is a submit page. And the only pieces of information that are really relevant here is it lists all the terms and conditions. You will have actually seen all these terms and conditions when you first log into the system. This is just a repeat of those same terms and conditions. The most important piece of information here is what is at the top of the page that's in red. Once you submit a proposal, you cannot edit it. And so you need to make sure that you've entered all the information. Your proposal is complete and ready to go before you submit it, because basically once you submit, that proposal's done. And the only way that you can make changes really at that point is to create another proposal where you fix the errors and submit that as well. So make sure that you've got everything ready to go before you go to the submit process. Right down the bottom of this page, there's a little form like this, which is basically the digital signature that gets attached to your proposal. And so the person signing their title, their email address, the date, and then that PIN number that you received via email, you hit the submit button. And at that point, you get a digital receipt that says your proposal was successfully submitted. The very bottom line there says it's submitted. So there's no ambiguity here about when and if the proposal got submitted. It's all done digitally. There's a digital timestamp. Erin knows exactly when you submitted it. So there's no ambiguity about did they make the deadline or not. At that point, you're done. You can click on the button at the bottom there, go to the home page. It takes you back. You can see now that your proposal, the edit and the delete links are no longer active. It says your proposal has been submitted, so you can't edit anymore, you can't delete it. You can click on the view print. It will generate a PDF for you that you can download and print out. But at that point, you're essentially done. You can go through and create another proposal if you wish. So you can go through all that fun again if you've got another proposal that you want to put together. But essentially, my proposal is now submitted and it's sitting in Erin's inbox waiting for her review. So that is a rather rapid summary of the RFP process. And so at this point, I think we can open it up to questions.
Do we ask questions on the phone or on the screen?
You can ask on the phone.
Okay. Hi, this is Kelly from Pitkin Simon.
Hi.
I have 2 questions. Is there a place where it can be printed so we can review a paper copy or on the screen even before we submit?
Correct. Yes, there is. So anytime that you go back to this home page, that view print link is active. So if I just go back a couple of slides here so this is when you're in the actual process, the page, filling it out. You can see there's a print link down the bottom here too, so you can get to it from there as well.
Great. And when filling out the budget, the 5 pages, can we skip the first page and go to entering the expenses first and then finding out what our number is and then go back to fill in the proposal amount that we want? Or do you have
you
to
can do it
in first in order to advance to the second page?
You can do it in any order that you want. The only requirement at the end of it is that the budget has to balance.
Great. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay.
Good morning. This is Tracy with COA. I have a quick question regarding the service areas. As we service more than one county, can we put multiple counties in, separate line items, or is it to be all one?
You can just add them as you need to. So you'll need to put in units of service by county, but you can put in multiple counties. So you select one county, put in the units, select the second county, put in the units for that county.
All right. Thank you.
Simon, this is Lori from Summit County. I just want to say thank you for making this so much easier to use.
That's what I like to hear. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you.
This is Chad from Picken.
Hi, Chad.
About the budget and the required match. I noticed that on your example, you inputted more than a required match. I'm sure many providers, far exceed the required match and then try to balance that budget. I guess my question is, for those providers that far outweigh what the required match is, it might be difficult to balance that budget as far as services and the like, if the minimal amount of match. So I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
So that, I think, is an Aaron question.
Sure.
Aaron, can you weigh in on this one?
I have to admit something really weird happened when you were halfway through that question, Chad, and I heard all the way up to putting in overmatch into the budget, and then it sounded like you were in outer space.
I am sometimes. But, I'm sure Aaron and I, we've talked about this before, I'm sure, but, for providers that far exceed that required match, it might be challenging to get the budget to balance. And so, I guess I'm, for my sake of being new to the system as well, how does the system take that into account when we're doing 30%? If we're inputting all of that revenue, for example, instead of the 10% match, and I guess I'm just curious of how the system recognizes that you are far exceeding the 10% match, and it might be challenging to balance the budget in that regard. I don't know if that makes sense, but
we're discussing here. Hold momentarily, please. We're still discussing. Hold on.
holding.
Okay, sorry about that, y'all. Yeah, so I'm going to let Amanda respond to that because there are a couple different ways to look at it, either looking at the big picture, which is this is how much it costs for the entire program, and everybody knows that AAA Older American Act funds and or state funds do not cover 100% of running your program. So there's the big picture where you include all of your expenses, in which you would include way more match versus doing a budget based on just the AAA expenditures. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, our financial guru.
I think in the current funding climate, the more information we have on what it costs for you to run the program, the better. It gives us some ability to advocate if we need to later on. So I think do the big picture, put in your match, put in your overmatch, put in anything, all the expenses. If you receive like a grant from the county or a grant from someone else that you don't count as match, but that helps defray your costs, put that in as well as the expenses that you attribute to that. That way we can have some good solid data moving forward. Does that help, Chad?
It does. I'm still concerned that if we in fact do a tell-all as far as our budget as far as expenses and revenues, that the budgets won't match. So the system won't let us actually submit it if the balance, actually the real budget, it might not work in the system, is my concern.
At the end of the day, that might be true. You may end up putting an expense, maybe you get additional money that you can roll over from year to year. So you may need to put an expense that is miscellaneous rollover to make that match, because unfortunately the system won't let you progress until it does match.
Okay.
Sorry, Chad.
I appreciate the straightforward yet vague answer.
I'm getting good at it.
Story of our life.
Welcome to the world of OAA funds, Chad. Are there any more questions regarding the operations of the system? Folks, thanks for your time. This last slide has my contact info. Feel free to reach out if you have any technical related questions. I would prefer you direct them through Erin first, but if she is not available, I'm happy to take your calls or your emails if you've got any specific technical questions about the way the system is working. Obviously, stuff about the RFP, I'll just push you all back to Erin and Amanda to have them address those questions. But again, I appreciate your time. Hopefully this all goes well for you and you get all those proposals in on time. Thanks so much. Amanda, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Simon. All right, so we're moving over to the other PowerPoint presentation, which is about AAA stuff. I know we had scheduled to go until noon. I really don't think, unless y'all have tons of questions, that it'll take this long. Most of this should be review. It shouldn't be new information for proposers who already have current contracts with us. Feel free to stop me at any time with questions. I feel like that makes more sense than waiting until the end. So just interrupt me. Chad, there's going to be more vague stuff when I talk about funding and reimbursements. I wish it wasn't so vague right now. I want to be as clear and transparent with what's going on with our federal and state funding as I can be from whatever the state has told us, which isn't much. So I will continue to keep you updated on our funding, but it's pretty unfortunate timing with everyone preparing for these new contracts and new budgets when I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen with our funding. But we'll get there. I have a slide for it. So, here's all the AAA stuff. Yeah, perfect. So these are just what we're going to go over today. Shouldn't be terribly new information. Go ahead and move it. All right, so here's some of the places where you can find the information. If you click on our website. So this is our AAA website. My assumption is that most of you have already been there. If you go to the Providers tab for providers, you'll see, scroll down. All right, so RFP information, the RFP guide, which you already have received in an email, it's big and huge mostly because a lot of it is just the state's policy and procedure manual for each of the services. It looks way scarier than it is. The actual instructions are probably no more than 5 or 7 pages. The RFP timeline is in there, and then the scoring matrix. So the RAC, the Regional Advisory Committee, they have a special grant review committee. And once all the proposals have been submitted, this is what they're going to be scoring on. So you can go back to the slides now. Oh, and that is also where, and I'll talk about the quiet period in just a minute, but when we go into the quiet period where I can't show preference for certain providers or questions, any questions that you may ask, I will answer, but I will put in an updated PDF that you'll be able to find on the AAA website. The second link is, we have a question here from our one in-person attendee, Tina.
Erin, I have a question on the question and answers. Will you be posting that PDF on a ongoing basis, or is the question and answers going to be posted at a particular date?
No, it'll just be updated every time I get a question. So whether that's every day, a couple times a day, hopefully not, or whatever it looks like, I'll just keep it updated daily. So the second link is everything. You don't have to go to it. That's just the link that Simon was showing us. That's your RFP link. And then that bottom link is the full policy and procedure manual. That's also on our website. You can also find the volume 10, which is another it's the other manual about all the services through the state, but you probably will reference the P&P more often than volume 10, but they're both on the AAA website. So the quiet period, we will enter into that after this conference is over. So ask all your questions now. Again, you can still ask us questions, but you'll have to email me, and then I will keep that PDF updated on our website with answers so that everyone has the same answers available to them. All right, so here are the basics for working with the AAA. This shouldn't be new information for you. We have to have an assessment for all registered services. That's the list of registered services. That's not the complete list, but those are all services that are available through this RFP process for you to contract for. We have to have assessment forms. They are mandated and created by the SUA. They are updated every year once the federal poverty guidelines are released. That normally happens in February or March. Then the state updates the assessment forms, and then I send y'all the state's updated assessment forms. Just make sure that whenever you are having a consumer fill out an assessment form, just make sure it's the most up-to-date form. There are some services that require reassessments, case management, home delivered meals, and chore. Currently, those reassessments are due on the 6 months that, how do I say this? If the consumer is still receiving those services, every 6 months, on the 6th month, it's due. There is talk that the P&P may be updated to say that the reassessments are due within a 6-month time period. So if somebody receives services in July, then you would have to update that sometime within the next 6-month time period instead of the 6th month. That hasn't been approved yet by APAC, the Aging and Policy Committee. But if it is approved, that would give us a much bigger window to work with reassessments. I know reassessments are a pain. I know that that's the email that CJ sends the most. Hey, your case management person needs their 6-month reassessment, or your home delivered meal person needs their 6-month reassessment. If this is passed through APAC and updated in the policy and procedure, it will be easier to get those reassessments because you'll basically have more time to do it. But it's definitely something that we get dinged on every year when the state looks. They always look at reassessments to make sure that they're on time. As of right now, that hasn't changed, so you're sticking with the 6-month reassessments as they are. I'll let you know if that gets updated. The database. Everybody knows about SAMS. That's what we've used through MetaWare for a long time. You probably have heard that SAMS is going away and that the State Unit on Aging is moving to this new system called PurePlace. All of the previews, and not really trainings, but pretty much previews that we've had for PurePlace so far, it looks to be leaps and bounds better than SAMS. It is more user-friendly. We spend all this time putting the data into it that we can't get out. We can't run trend reports. Sometimes we can't even run basic reports. PurePlace hopefully will be a lot better, and we'll be able to use the information we spend all that time entering in. As of right now, the last email that I received from the state, they are supposed to be transitioning from SAMS to PurePlace on May 1st. That same email said that training for PurePlace would happen a few weeks before May 1st, so sometime in April. I don't have any more information than that. That information will probably come directly from the state, probably from Berge to all the current users of SAMS. But I will also keep you up to date if there's anything that I hear in the meantime. You will have to attend that PurePlace training. I will be at that PurePlace training because it's going to be a completely new system. Our big change and it's only a big change for a couple of providers. As you know, when Jean left, one of the big changes that I did was you used to send everything to Jean, and Jean would put it into SAMS. And then since then, we've transitioned to now most providers are putting in that information themselves. It's really just case management and caregiver support groups that still send the information to us, and we input it. Beginning July 1 with this new contract, everybody will be responsible for entering in all of their information. You won't need to send CJ anything. You'll be putting it in there. I think it'll make it easier for you to be able to see, well, I can't add units for this case management client because I don't have their assessment in there. And that'll be easier than CJ having to say, well, you've got units for them, but I don't have an updated reassessment, or I don't have an assessment form, whatever that looks like. So that's kind of the one holdover, is that all providers will now be responsible for entering that into PurePlace. But I anticipate lots and lots of training on PurePlace from the state. Any questions specifically about that move from SAMS to PurePlace? Okay. Background checks. This is also another one that Candace has really focused on, given her background with APS before she moved over to the SUA. This isn't different. There was the new law that was passed, gosh, I guess it's been a year and a half ago, which has a lot more to do with the APS teams and background checks. It hasn't affected us as of right now. We're still requiring that any staff that has one-on-one contact with people 60 and over have to have a background check. The PNP says a CBI, which is the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. It says that you either have to have a CBI background or equivalent. We've had a lot of issues with trying to prove that if it isn't a CBI background check, that it is equivalent, and a lot of pushback. So if you are hiring new staff or running background checks on volunteer drivers or home delivered meal drivers, it's easiest to do a CBI background check. We can't make you do that, but be ready for lots of questions from Candace and the state about, is it really equivalent if it's not CBI? So example, if you're a case manager, you're driving a bus, you're senior center staff, you're the RD, you have to have that background check. Candace will ask for a random sample to make sure that those have been done. Volunteers like home delivered meal drivers, caregiver support group facilitators, if they're not paid, well, even if they are paid, have to have those background checks as well. So nothing really new, just kind of a reminder about those. Again, not new. For all of your services, you have to have complaint and grievance information that has the contact information for us, plus the email address and a phone number. Has to have the contact information for the State Unit on Aging, plus, no, actually, I take that back. It doesn't have to have an email. It does have to have a phone number. For the State Unit on Aging, even if you haven't received a complaint, you still have to have a complaint log so that Candace can make sure that you're set up in case you do receive a complaint. You have to have a way of tracking people if they go on a waiting list, even if you don't currently have a waiting list. I assume that everybody already has this stuff because this is things that we've talked about in past on-sites that I've done with you, but if by chance you need an updated copy of this or you just want a copy of it, just let me know. I can email it to you. You do have to be soliciting for voluntary donations. So whether it's a letter that you mail out or it's included in information when you send it to your home, when you send meals out with the home delivered meal drivers, or it's something that you keep in your congregate meal site, you have to have something about ways that you can donate with suggested donation amounts. And you should be doing some kind of satisfaction survey. That was something that Candace spent a lot of time looking through last year as well. Insurance, none of this is new. These are all of the insurance documents that you have to prove to us before your contract is finalized. On July 1, CJ keeps track of those in a spreadsheet and probably will contact you in the next few months if we need the updated copy of your workers' comp or your cyber insurance. Specifically, the RD has to have professional liability insurance. All of the details about that with the required insurance amounts can be found. If you don't have that, it's on your contract. If you already have one, if you need that, I can post that on the website as well, because I don't actually think that's in the PNP. Monthly reports, nothing new. It's still on the same due date each month. So once we move to Pure Place instead of Sam's, all that information will still be due on the 15th of the month for the previous month. That's also when the reimbursement requests through OASIS are also due. So if you are doing July's reimbursement request, it'll be due on August 15th. Compliance, this is new. This is new in the past year because trying to get a handle on some of the compliance issues that we had with the State Unit on Aging. So CJ is our de facto compliance manager, and she's the one who each month goes through, and this is definitely new for this year, going through and making sure the menu analysis that the RD does matches the menu. And for those of you who may have had a compliance issue with this, you know that the state was looking through this with a fine-tooth comb. So it's really, ever since CJ has been able to take the time to look through it, y'all have been doing a really great job. It matches to the T almost every month. So thanks for that. I know that that's a lot of work. And assessments, so that's also the other thing that CJ's been doing. She looks to make sure that if a consumer received a service, that there is an assessment, and if it requires a 60-day assessment or a 6-month assessment, that it's the most current one. Also checking to make sure that if we're on state fiscal year 16 or 17, 18 assessments, that you're not using an assessment form from 2013. That's the other thing she checks. I didn't add this on this slide, but I have written confirmation from the state that you don't have to keep the paper assessment forms. It kind of blew my mind, but apparently you haven't had to keep that for quite a while. So we've kind of purged here at the office. It surprises me because we have to keep hard copies of a lot of other things, but I have a written email from Bergie that says that we don't have to keep paper assessment forms, that once it goes into the database, that's good enough. CJ also compares the units that are in the database system, so SAMS right now, so if it says that you had 15 hours of case management, she makes sure that you are also requesting 15 hours for reimbursement in your monthly reimbursement request in OASIS. If they don't match, hi Susan. If they don't match, she sends you an email or gives you a call and lets you know that they don't match. She tells you what's going on. She normally, if she has to open up the reimbursement request, she does that. And if those errors aren't corrected in time, then we will hold your payment until those corrections have been made. The same thing goes with if we're missing assessment forms, and that's the theoretical assessment forms, basically the information in the database, either SAMS or PurePlace. If that isn't in there, or the 6-month reassessments are not the new ones, the new 6-month assessments haven't been added, we will hold payment until those have been updated as well. Questions? Okay. Annual evaluations is still the same. We are still required to do an on-site evaluation every year. I try and make this as easy as possible with you. I figure out what month Candace is looking at. I will request that same month's information so that you don't have to pull 2 different months worth of all of the things. The State Unit on Aging does an evaluation every year. It oscillates between whether it's an on-site or a desk evaluation. Last year we had a desk eval. Some people, including myself, may think that it's actually more work to do a desk eval than it is to do an on-site. This year it's an on-site. Each year they choose the different programs that they want to take a look at. It is always nutrition. It is usually transportation, and then it is whatever else they decide to look at. It's kind of a different microscopic look each year, and we never really know what to expect. In addition, as we all learned last year, they may throw some additional audits, evaluations on us as well. I think there was a total of 4 last year. So the state legislator asked that we have a fiscal audit last year, so we had that as well. Hopefully they got a lot of it out of their system. You can always plan on 2 evaluations a year though. Okay. So as of right now, we reimburse for your actual expenditures. I changed that from what Jean had been doing, which she had implemented during sequestration a few years ago, where we were reimbursing equal amounts by 12. So she divided up the total amount of the contract by 12, and regardless of how many units you did, how many expenditures you had, you got 1/12 each month. I understand why she did that. 2 years ago, funding seemed a lot more stable, so it made more sense to leave that sequestration mode of thinking and go into actual reimbursement. The third way of reimbursing, which we haven't done, but we are one of 2 AAAs that doesn't do it this way, and during every evaluation, during the special financial audit that we got last year, from every SUA audit we get a lot of pushback from the state that we are not reimbursing on a unit rate reimbursement. That's as simple as you get $1,000, you say in your budget or your RFP that you're going to have 100 units, so your unit rate is $10, and each month we only reimburse you by the number of units that you have provided. In some ways, it's super easy. There's no ambiguity to it. You have a unit rate, you have a number of units, that's how much you get paid for. That's basically how the rest of the state does it. That's how the state wants us to do it. I don't know right now how we're going to be able to reimburse you last year. I mean, you're going to be able to reimburse you. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know which one of those 3 reimbursement methods we're going to use. I have a slide that talks about funding, and that will explain to you why I don't know how we're going to be able to do it yet. Amanda and I have Amanda's done 4 budgets so far since July, or maybe even since before then, with our ever-changing federal funding debacle. I would recommend that you have a couple different budgets as well. It may be that we do some services with the unit rate reimbursement. It kind of makes sense to move something like transportation and or case management to a unit rate reimbursement because it's pretty cut and dry. Other services aren't that easy. So this is my very long-winded way of saying, right now we're doing actual cost reimbursement. The state wants us to go to unit rate reimbursement. We're one of the few AAAs that doesn't, because we've always had a lot more flexibility with funding. Being a smaller region, being a more affluent region, we haven't had cash flow issues. We haven't been concerned that the feds aren't going to give us our money. It's a different world right now. So also sequestration is back on the table this spring, so it might make sense to go back to the 1/12 monthly reimbursement. I'm sorry I can't give you more of a very clear path of what it's going to look like. I'm being as transparent and honest about this as I can be with the information that's given to me from the state. Questions? Okay. People can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to go through the services that you can potentially contract for. Case management, just as a reminder, case managers, in the policy and procedures manual, there are certain educational or work experience guidelines that case managers have to meet. Your case records have to contain certain elements as far as case notes, your goals, timeline, stuff like that. All of that is in the P&P. It's not been changed since the last time we talked about this, but if you want a refresher, it's all in the P&P. Case management does have to do 6-month reassessments, and just as a reminder, for units, 1 unit is 1 hour of case management. Sure, this is new. This is a registered service, and we are doing this service as a voucher. We've been working with Simon and Devon to have all of our vouchers online, which makes it really easy for us, for y'all. Providers will go on and they will go onto this, a similar system to what you go on a monthly basis for your contract or for your reimbursement. And they will have the system like create vouchers, and then they can go on and redeem them. That sends a notice to you if you're a tour, if you contract for the tour service, or to us if it's going through us. And then we can submit that to our fiscal department. They cut a check. It's new. We're actually still kind of piloting it internally, but I think it's going to be a pretty great system. Pikes Peak and the Durango AAA have been using a form of it. Ours is kind of a hybrid of those two regions successfully for a few years now. So, but that's a new one that you could apply for if you're interested. It requires 6-month assessment. Evidence-based health promotion and disease prevention is a registered service. To receive the federal funds, the programs have to meet the highest tier. So those are our Part D federal funds. An example of one of the highest tiers would be like Tai Chi for balance or Tai Chi for health, I think. Interestingly, In Balance does not meet that highest tier, but we use state funding to pay for evidence-based health promotion services and programming that doesn't meet the highest tier. 1 unit is 1 hour, and normally it's multi-week classes, like 8-week, 12-week classes. INR or INA, currently not a registered service. It's one-on-one contact. It's when you talk to somebody on the phone. It's when you respond to an email. It's when you talk to somebody at a health fair. 1 unit is 1 contact. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of INR. I count all of my emails as information referral. Nutrition, congregate meals, registered service, all of those bullet points, definitely not going to go into all of those because we could do a presentation just on this. All of this information is in the policy and procedures. As you know, if you are a current nutrition provider, this is updated pretty regularly in the policy and procedure. Things that they're adding, like therapeutic meals, I think in the past year or two, they've added the takeaway meals, which has been really nice for people who don't eat their entire lunch and want to take it out. Of course, there's lots of regulations and rules and paperwork associated with that, but I think so far it's worked out well for our meal providers. If you do subs, that has to get reviewed and approved by the RD. You've got to ask for voluntary donations. Guest fees, for those who subsidize guest fees, you know that's a continuing change. Nothing's been updated in the policy and procedures manual with it yet. We'll see how that goes with our on-site evaluations this year. INSIP, we probably got an email this morning because we got our second allotment of INSIP funds. None of this is particularly new. You know what I don't have on there is time as a public health control. That is new for this year. I don't know that anybody is using that public health mechanism for making sure that the meals stay within the regulatory temperatures and everything, but that is new to the P&P. Oh, yes, Tina has a question.
And I have a question. So there has not been any information from the state regarding a standardized guest fee?
We've been told that you are no longer, as nutrition providers, going to have to complete that Excel spreadsheet that the state has created that determines your guest fee. We have been told that the state is going to determine a regional guest fee for each of the regions, and that's what you're going to use. I haven't heard an update about that in a couple months. There's certainly not been anything communicated to me about when that will happen. So in the time being, I even am 98% sure that if you had updated your guest fee for this year, for starting in this calendar year, I have an email that says you can either use that guest fee amount or you can continue to use the one that you were using back in 16-17. So we're on a holding pattern for that. But yes, we have been told that the state is going to start telling us what our guest fee is and that you no longer have to try and figure it out yourself.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Home delivered meals, it's a lot of the same rules and regs. There's my time as a public health control. Biggest difference between home delivered and congregate is home delivered has to have 6-month reassessments. The RD has 3 different functions: nutrition education, nutrition counseling, and nutrition consultation. Probably, if you are a nutrition provider, you would be seeing the RD for all of those. I was thinking mostly nutrition consultation. That's where the RD does the menu analysis, once a year comes in and does the kitchen evaluation, checks your refrigerator and checks to make sure that everything's clean and sanitary and all those kind of things. There are no units associated with nutrition consultation. That is just a per hour kind of rate, but none of that information is entered into our database system because you're not really, if you're the RD, you're not talking to seniors at that point. That's mostly the nutrition. That's the part of it. That's the nutrition provider. That's your biggest association with the RD there. Nutrition counseling is where the RD will speak one-on-one with a senior who has specific questions or needs. Maybe on a home-delivered meal assessment, it came up that they were high risk in the nutrition category, so the RD goes through and will meet with that person one-on-one, either in person or over the phone, and do some nutrition counseling with that person. One unit is one contact, one contact. And then nutrition education, that looks different in 2 different ways. So as you know, if you're a nutrition provider, you have to have monthly nutrition education, which normally goes out in the form of your newsletters. And that has to be approved by an RD. It doesn't have to be the AAA RD, but we have that database that you can go and see the RD approved education articles that you can use for your monthly nutrition education requirements if you want. And then the RD also has to do 1 presentation per year as part of the policy and procedures manual. Any questions about RD? Okay. Transportation, most people who have the transportation contract right now actually have their own vehicles that they use. There is one provider who is reimbursing people for their mileage. It's a pretty small contract, but that is an option as well. And we're also looking to, if you do that kind of transportation, we're looking into potentially moving that into those vouchers as well for reimbursement, for the mileage reimbursement for individuals driving themselves. 1 unit is a one-way trip. Public information, it's like information and assistance. but instead of one-on-one contact, this is normally what we think about for media blitz or marketing blitz. This is, you would count all of your monthly newsletters if you're a senior center and you send out monthly newsletters. We've done radio ads, and I mean, you can have a ridiculous number of units for public information. We've had upwards of 75,000 public information units because we get the information from the radio that they, you know, within a week, there may be 50,000 people who hear this ad. And so we'll have 50,000 public information units if we run a radio ad. If you put something in the newspaper, figure out what the distribution is for that newspaper, and you could have 25,000 public information units. Public information units, if you have that contract, it should be at a minimum several hundred units. It's because you're talking about big marketing campaigns, even if that's just your monthly newsletter. I really should never be seeing 5 public information units. It doesn't make sense. I don't think there have been times when INR and public information, the difference between the two hasn't always been clear. But if you think public information is kind of your marketing side of it, then you should always think that that's going to be much higher units than information referral. Legal assistance is not a registered service because of the need to keep it anonymous, which is why it's not registered, because a lot of the legal assistance is actually one-on-one consultations, but it's not registered. So the legal assistance program is a contract through the state and a selected contractor, and 1 unit is 1 hour. Funding. Okay, so here's my update about funding. Shortly before Christmas, which is the last time I got any kind of update from the state on where we are with this, the state was anticipating, so let me back up even a little bit more. I'm sorry for those of y'all who have heard this through the RAC meetings, but that's not necessarily everybody. So the federal government hasn't passed a budget, and what they're doing is they have continuing resolutions that have been, you know, every 2, 3, 4 weeks, and they will pass the continuing resolution, the CR, which keeps the government from shutting down. The problem with our funding, and as Amanda found out, it's not just human services kind of funding. It was some like weird defense stuff as well. I mean, we're not the only ones in this boat, but up until this year, we have always received all of our state funding and all of our federal funding on July 1, basically. This year, it hasn't looked like that. We did receive all of our state funding. We still haven't received any of our carryover funding, and our federal funding is coming to us in spurts. So we actually just received at least some of our federal funding a couple months ago. We spent the first 3 or 4 months or so without any of it, and so we've kind of just been bleeding our state funding. We get a little bit more than half of our funding is state, and the rest of it is federal. If we hadn't received any of our federal funding, we would be completely out of money by about this time, actually. So thankfully, we did receive certain percentages of our federal funding. I don't know how they figured it out. It was like 40% of this line item and 60% of this line item and 100% of this and 20% of this. I don't know why it was that way. So now going back to where I started this, in December, so the last continuing resolution was, I think, December 22nd. There was a lot of optimism from the state that the continuing resolution would be passed, and it would be for 1 month. Something about a 1 month continuing resolution would trigger the federal government to be able to give us all the rest of the money. They did pass the CR, but it was for 28 days, not for 1 month. So we still don't have all of our federal funding. I didn't receive any kind of update from the state, so I asked Todd for one. And now it comes to the state comptroller, who basically is going to have to approve the state being able to release funds that technically don't exist. It's kind of like an IOU. So it's the state saying, we really think that the feds are going to give us these funds, but because they're not passing a budget and they're only passing these 3-week CRs, we're pretty sure that you're going to get the federal funding, but we kind of need you to just trust us on this and let us free up this money. As of right now, the state comptroller hasn't been willing to do that. I don't have an update from the state about that yet. So now this kind of goes back to how we're looking at reimbursing for this new contract season, not knowing, I mean, we've just been getting these spurts of money. We're also, like I said earlier, looking at sequestration potentially kicking back in the spring. The one positive bit of news that I have for you is that the governor did include $4 million in his budget that would go towards state services. You know that they are just now starting to meet. They've got a whole bunch of things that they've got to get through over the next couple months, including passing the budget. We have been supplying a ton of information to people with the JBC, to Dr. Coggs, what is his name? No, I mean, his name is Rich, but what is it called? What? Oh, yeah, lobbyist. Thank you. To the Dr. Cog lobbyist, who is lobbying for additional senior funding for the whole state. We're trying to give them as much information as we can so that hopefully they will pass that $4 million in addition to state funding, which obviously we would turn right back around to y'all and do contract amendments and give you more funding. We don't know. There's obviously lots of other organizations and priorities for the state about how they're going to look at the budget. That is good news, though, that the governor did include that $4 million in his budget. That was the first big hurdle. So that's another really long-winded explanation. I'm telling you what I know. I will continue to keep you updated from when I hear updates from the state about what's going on with our federal funding. But I hope, I mean, I want to give you as much surety as I can based on what I know, and that's why I'm not really sure how the reimbursement will look next year. I highly encourage you to, when you're doing your budgets, to try and make them as accurate as you can in case we do move to the per unit rate cost reimbursement. If you have factored in all of your costs, all of the admin time that it takes for you to do all of this stuff, all of your costs of actually running the program, your overhead, if you can have as accurate of a per unit rate as you can, I think it's going to be helpful in the long run, even if we don't end up reimbursing that way. Questions about funding?
And part of the reason it's so ambiguous and why we're moving between these three options is wanting to be sure that we can reimburse you timely. Based on, we're running forecasts of which of these options can we be sure to get you the money back to you as soon as possible, as opposed to the way it's trickling into us. If we can kind of act as a mediator to keep you guys flowing, that's our goal, and that's why it is so ambiguous. We realize it's really hard to do a budget that way.
Yeah, but like what I said that to Amanda yesterday when we were talking about this, and I was like, yeah, you know, it's just so hard. And she was like, Erin, we've done 4 budgets. So we are, in the same boat as you are too. It's as frustrating for us as it is, I'm sure, for you to hear this from me. There's just nothing clear about it right now. Todd has continued to be really optimistic this whole time. I mean, he thought we'd get the funding in September and then October, and then for sure in December this CR would pass and it would be for a month and we would be able to get all the funding, and now here we are. He continues to be optimistic about the funding for July 1, that this is a really weird, wonky year, but bear with us and next year it'll go back to normal. I don't know. I no longer am sure that I hope that happens. That certainly would be easier for all of us.
But we're trying to be as pessimistic as possible.
Yeah. It's always better to look, when it comes to funding, I think it's better to look at the worst case scenario and then, great, we get all of this funding and everything's back to normal, than it is to say, yeah, here's all the money in the world, you spend it, and then we can't reimburse you because the money didn't come. The one good thing is that as of right now, we're not looking, well, sequestration could change that just because of the nature of sequestration, but we're looking at flat funding. So we're not talking about, hey, everything's ambiguous and we're getting this massive cut in funds. So that's good news.
Yeah, it's more of a time cash flow issue than necessarily, at this point, funding. Oh, go ahead, Tina.
I guess the only thing that I would encourage you guys to do is, if we could choose a path, and even if it's the most conservative path, and stay with that. I think the most challenge to us is not the way you guys are going to reimburse us, but that it changes. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if we're used to getting all the money in July, and then now it's going to be true at 12-month period, we have a year within our budget that we've only received very, very little money. And so when we go to the Board of County Commissioners or whoever, it looks like for that year we only received like $20,000, where we told them we would receive $50,000. Mm-hmm. So in those years of change, it can look like we didn't receive this contracted amount. And yes, we all understand that, but when you're having to explain the world of this funding to a Board of County Commissioners or whoever that we have to, it is very difficult for them to understand. So I guess I would just say, I don't really have a preference on which way, but if we could choose a way and stick with it, I think that is the most beneficial to us. The difficulty becomes when it changes.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. And this was, I was hoping that this would be a time for more discussion from everybody. If you agree with Tina, or if you feel really strongly about one of the reimbursement ways, we certainly don't have anything set in stone. I'm just kind of putting out, these are our options, and we're trying to come up with the way that's going to work best with our staggered cash flow, so that we continue to make sure that y'all are getting reimbursed and we don't run out of money in January. So if you have things to add to Tina's statement or suggestions, things for us to consider, now's the time.
Especially before the quiet period. This would be good. Because we've argued all three of them.
Yeah, we just keep
back and forth.
Back? Yay! Okay, I'll go back. So, did you hear Tina's comment about funding?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. So I think we moved on from funding then, unless it cut off when I said any more comments or questions. Speak now. Trevor, hold your peace. Okay. The proposals are due right before midnight on February 6th. Oh, yeah. So Tina had wanted verification of that you will do one proposal that is inclusive of all the services, not one proposal per survey. So one proposal, even if you are requesting 6 services. Grant Review Committee will meet on February 28th. They will receive all of the information before then. Our hope is to make it as easy as possible for them. We're going to create a spreadsheet that has all of the current funding on there, and then what the requested funding is from all the proposals, and we'll have our budget, what that looks like, on there as well. I'm hoping for a pretty easy process. By March 23rd, everyone who submitted an RFP will receive either a letter of intent or denial. If you were denied, then there will be a time that you can appeal, just like last time. And then new contracts begin July 1. I will contact each submitter and find out who signed your contracts, because I know some people will have multiple people working on the RFP, and sometimes even people who are the providers, you'll have somebody from your board of county managers or your town manager or somebody else sign it. So I'll get with you once contracts have been approved to figure out who needs to sign your contract. The state still requires hard copies, so that's all of my slides. We will send out both Simon's slides and my slides, as well as a PDF document that has all of the current funding, so that you can take a look at that and see what other service providers received in this last contract time period. So that might give you a little bit of direction as you're creating your own budgets as well. Questions, comments? Okay, y'all. Well, if you have questions, whether they're technical questions or contract funding related questions, shoot me an email. And when I have updated the Q&A PDF on our website, I will respond to your email and say, hey, check the website. If you haven't asked any questions, it still may behoove you to check that every once in a while just to see if there have been any other questions that you may not have thought about that someone else asked. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time and bearing with this webinar, and I'll talk to you all later.